Scouts Victoria respectfully acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Victoria where our activities take place today. We pay our respects to elders both past, present and emerging, and continue to recognise and embrace the important continuous history and connection to land and community of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people.
Hi, I'm Lily and welcome to Scout Quest. Tonight we have a very exciting guest, the one and only Winter Olympian Kirstie Marshall. Kirstie's come here tonight and she's going to talk about how she paved the way for Australian women in aerial skiing. She's had a huge list of accomplishments, so don't mind me looking at my list to make sure I get them all correct. So firstly, she has won an astounding 41 World Cup medals, of which 17 have been gold. She finished third on points in the 1990 World Cup Series, second in 91, and then took the World Cup title in 92. Kirstie has represented Australia at the Winter Olympics in 94 in Lillehammer and 98 in Nagano. After retiring, Kirstie launched a successful career in state politics. So I'm really excited to introduce Kirstie tonight.
Hello.
Hi.
How are you, Lily?
I'm good.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me here. It's an absolute honour, and I'm very pleased to be able to share some of my story, and hopefully it'll spark something in somebody else that they might see a little bit of themselves in me and what's happened to me.
Yeah, I know. I think Scouts Victoria will be really grateful to hear it all.
Fantastic. Would you like me to start?
Yes, please.
Fantastic. All right. Well, first of all, good evening, everybody. Very nice to see everybody that's here. I think the first thing that I wanted to explain was when I was at school, and because I have to talk about my skiing career when it started, which wasn't until I was 15. And I have two daughters, one is 17 and one is 15. And they were two very important times in my life. So when I was a really small kid, I was running around hyperactive, and my mum decided that I needed to do something to put all of that energy into good use. And she signed me up for gymnastics, but at that stage you weren't allowed to start before you were 8. So I annoyed my parents and everybody walking out of the doorways down the hallway until that stage. And then I got into gymnastics and just loved it. It just suited me so well. I'm quite short, but I was very flexible and pretty strong. And I worked my way up quite quickly. By the time I was 13, I was on the national team and I was competing at the national championships. And I competed there for 2 years. And the second year that I was there, I just turned 15. And I remember I finished second on vault. And I think I finished about fourth on bars. We had to do all 4 events, both 2 days, compulsory and optional. And I remember looking behind and looking at all these really young girls behind me who were going to be beating me the next year. There was no doubt. They were just so much better. And so I decided, I came back from that second lot of national championships, and I just walked in home and I said to my mum, do you know what, I've had enough. And at that stage I was doing over 30 hours training a week. I was in the Victorian Institute of Sport for gymnastics, as well as my own club. And my mum never questioned it. She just said that obviously that was what I wanted, and I was never pushed into sport. And as a result of stopping gymnastics, my parents had been going up to the mountains as recreational skiers, and I hadn't been able to do it because I'd had so much of a commitment with the gym. So I started going skiing, and one of the things that gymnastics had left me with was an incredibly athletic body. I didn't have a whole lot of confidence, and that's why I was sort of talking about when I was at school. So if I think of the 15-year-old person that I was in terms of sports, I was pretty talented all round, not particularly good at anything, but good all round. But when I think of myself at school, I was so shy and I had no confidence. And I can remember teachers saying to me, oh, you can do it, Kirstie. You know, whatever it was an essay or a maths test, and oh, you can do it. And I didn't believe for a second I was smart enough to do it. And I usually didn't do very well. But my teachers kept encouraging me. And anyway, so then I went up to the mountain skiing with my family. And at that stage, it was my older sister and my younger brother. And I was just a recreational skier. And I did that for 2 years. And when I was then 16, towards the end of the winter, I was skiing up at Mount Bulla, and it was, quite a beautiful day. And normally when you were skiing back then, there was no sound on the mountains. There wasn't music blaring out of the pylons, or for those people who do ski. And we didn't have, obviously, Apple iTunes or anything else like that. You couldn't even have CDs being played. So it was just dead silent. And I was skiing around, and all of a sudden I heard some music being played. And I kind of remember stopping and thinking, what's that? It was like a concert. And so I skied over towards where the sound was coming from. And as I came over the ridge of where I was skiing from, I could see in the distance what looked like people being thrown. It's the best way I can explain it. They were on skis. I couldn't see them taking off, and I couldn't see them landing, but I could just see these bodies going up in the air, and it just looked hilarious. So I came over and I saw for the very first time what was my sport. And we call it freestyle skiing, aerial skiing, but back then it was actually just called hot dogging, freestyle skiing. And so I stood there watching these people doing all sorts of jumps, upright jumps, 360s, jumps where they're putting their poles between their skis, what we call a Cossack, or then there were some people doing front somersaults and back somersaults. And most of the time they didn't land. Well, they did land. They didn't land on their skis. They landed on their back or their stomach, but they always sort of bounced back up. And nobody got hurt and everybody was laughing. But there was this one guy who was extremely good. And every time I watched him, he would only do a front somersault. And every time I watched him, he landed. And after a little while, I was probably standing there for about an hour. I thought, I better go and have some, do some skiing myself. So I went to ski down to the bottom of the ski run to catch the lift back up. And the guy that I was been watching did another front somersault, landed perfectly. And I thought, I'll see if I can get on the lift with him. So I skied down and I got onto the lift with him. And I didn't say anything to him. I just sort of looked at him a few times because he was about my age, a little bit older. So he's probably, I think he was about 17 or 18 then. And I just kept looking at him. Oh, he's so cute, And I was jumps well, cute boy. Got up to the top of the lift and I thought, I'll go and watch him one more time. So he skied over to the top of the jump and I skied around to the side where the sort of spectators were. And I watched him do another perfect front somersault, landed on his feet, skied down to the bottom of the lift, and I got back on the same chair as him again. And I looked over and I sort of smiled at him, and I'm not joking. He was on the chair and he looked at me and he wasn't smiling and he shuffled a bit away from me. And then I realized I was probably scaring him. I said, oh, no, look, I've just been watching you, And he said, yeah, I know you have. And I said, no, I've been watching you because you're so good. Like, I used to do gymnastics, but this is kind of like gymnastics on skis, but you always land. And anyway, we talked all the way up on the lift, and it turned out he was actually a member of the same club that I was, but we never had the girls training in gymnastics, the girls at the same time as the boys. So by the time we got up to the top of the lift, he said, look, you've got to come over and meet the coaches. And so I said, yeah, I'd love to, and to be quite honest, I was sort of caught up in speaking to this boy that I was, had a bit of a crush on already. So we went over to the jump and he took me to where there were 5 coaches, 5 people running the team. And Phil is his name. And Phil introduced me to one of the head coaches, Jeff. And he said, Jeff, this is Kirstie. And she used to be a gymnast. And, she'd be perfect for doing this. There were no other girls jumping. It was about 35 guys in this team, not a single girl there. And the guy, Jeff, looked at me and then he looked at Phil and he said, yeah, I'm sure she used to be able to do a handstand, sort of thing. And I got really offended. And I said, no. I was a national gymnast. And I said, I'll prove it to you. And I stood in the snow. I took my ski boots off and I was in my socks and I did a standing back somersault, an absolute true story. And Jeff just was like, oh my God, you've got to come and ski. You've got to, And I said, yeah, I'd love to give it a try. And I'm thinking, I'll give it a try in summer. But anyway, he said, look, come back tomorrow and we'll sort something out. So I came back the next day and they got me a pair of skis because the normal skis that we'd be skiing on at that stage, I was skiing on about 180 centimetres. And the ones that they jump on are 160. They're a bit smaller. So they got a pair of skis and they fitted them to my ski boots, and then they built me a little jump over on the side. And they said, Jeff and the other coaches said, look, we just want you to learn what it feels like to get air under your skis. So I was not on the main side. I was off to the side. I was watching everybody else still having all this fun and the music blaring out of these speakers. And I had to keep going over this tiny, what I called a tiny little jump. I'd get up some air, I'd land, I'd stop, I'd take my skis off and I'd walk back up. And I just got bored really quickly. So I came back and I said, look, I can do that. I said, I want to try something more challenging. Like, what else can I do? And there were about 5 different jumps that they'd built out of snow. And the smallest one was only about 1 metre off the ground. The one I'd been jumping on was about, 50 centimetres, about half of that. And that was the smallest one. And then they sort of went up from there. And I thought, oh, they'll probably just put me on the 1 metre. No, they will put me on the 1 metre one. And anyway, so then Jeff said, all right. He said, go up to the top of the jump and you go and ask for Tim. Tim's the one up there. He's got blonde hair. He said, Tim will tell you what to do. So I'm excited. I'm thinking, oh, fantastic. I'm going to go off a slightly larger jump. And I get up to the jump and I call out for this guy, Tim. And Tim, I said, Tim, Jeff told me to speak to you. He said that I'm ready to do one of the next jumps. And Tim sort of looked at me a bit confused. I went, well, okay. I want you to go from this point here. I want you to go off that jump there. And I want you to do a front somersault. Do you think you can do it? And I'm not joking. The adrenaline fear that was pumping through my body as he said that was enormous. And I can remember my legs starting to shake. And I looked him square in the eye and just somehow fumbled the words out of my mouth. And I went, sure. I had no idea really what I was doing. But I just wanted to do something else. And the truth of the matter was everybody that had jumped, I saw them fall, but they always got up. They weren't injured. And so there was you've got to remember at this stage, I'm 16 years old and I think I'm bulletproof for this. And I just sort of thought, I think I can do this. So as I'm standing there and I'm thinking about doing a front somersault, and Tim had told me a little bit about, standing forward on your skis and put your arms, do all these sorts of things. And I knew how to do a front somersault, that's for sure. And I'm thinking about it. I closed my eyes because in gymnastics we used to visualize. So I closed my eyes and I'm thinking front somersault. And I'm envisaging, and what I realized I was seeing in my mind wasn't me jumping. I'd been watching that guy, Phil. I watched him jump 20 times and I started replaying him jumping and I could slow it down and see it really clearly. And as that was happening, I started getting a bit more confident because I knew sort of what was going to happen. And so anyway, I'm standing there and I'm thinking, okay, that's I'm going to do that. And I opened my eyes and I looked around, and before then there would have been about 10 people standing up at the top of the jump and that guy, Tim, the coach. And I opened my eyes and they were all skiing down towards where the jumps were. And I'm there on my own. And I called out to Tim. I'm like, hey, where are you going? And he said, that's all right. Just keep an eye on me. When I raise my hand, then everything's ready for you to go. We're going to prep the landing here. We'll make it really soft so you'll be fine. And I'm thinking, okay, I can do this. So anyway, eventually Tim raises his hand and he goes, right, you're clear, let's go. So I start skating. I'm coming down towards the jump. I'm thinking front somersault, hands forward, thinking about what Tim had told me. And I can hear this sound as I'm coming towards the jump. And it's like a da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da. And I'm thinking, what is that? Because the loud music that had been playing had been completely turned off so that I could hear Tim as he was calling out to me when I was obviously in the jump. And I'm thinking about the noise and I'm getting closer. I'm thinking, I've got to concentrate, front somersault. And just before I just got to the base of the jump, all of these boys had their heads sticking up over the other jumps, looking at me, coming towards them, going, the girl is going to die. The girl is going to die. And I don't think mean die, but as in smash. She's going to smash. And I just thought about them. And I was thinking, you buggers. Anyway, I did a front somersault. I landed on my skis and I skied just straight out of it. And I stopped at the bottom and I turned around and they weren't cheering or anything. And I'm thinking, oh, that's not good. And I'm looking up and I take my skis off and I walked back up to the hill, up to where they were all standing at the jumps. And Jeff, the main coach, turned around to me and he said, that's unbelievable. Never seen anybody land that first jump. Do you think you could do it again? I went, yeah, sure. I'm a girl. We can do this stuff. So I spent the rest of the day jumping. I learnt a front somersault and a back somersault that first Sunday. And at the end of the day, Jeff, the head coach, said to me, he said, we've got national championships in New South Wales on Wednesday. We don't have any girls, and we'd just love you to come and join our team. Do you think you'll be able to do that? And I said, I haven't actually told my parents what I'm doing this weekend, so maybe you better speak to them. And he did. He came back to the ski lodge, spoke to my parents, and somehow convinced them. My mother was a teacher, so I thought that was a pretty good effort by Jeff, that I was going to take some couple of days off school, and they were going to drive up to Guthinger in New South Wales. And we had training on the Tuesday, and I was going to compete on the Wednesday for my second, my first ever national championships. And for the, Tuesday being the second day I would have ever jumped. And we got up there, and there was a snowstorm, and the training on the Tuesday got cancelled. But they ended up running the actual national championships on the Wednesday. And that was my second day of jumping ever. And I did a front somersault, a single front and a single back somersault, and I landed on both of them. And I ended up finishing second in the national championships. And I was so excited. And I had never won, anything. And this was pretty close on my second day. And I remember thinking, when I was standing on the podium, the girl who won, whose name was Tasha Eben, and she didn't look particularly happy. And I was beaming. It was the first time I had my photograph taken for a newspaper, and I've looked at that photo many a time over the years, and I just remember that sense that when I was standing on the podium, I felt like I knew I could do something. And I thought back to when I was at school, and when the teachers would say, you can do something, and I, in my own head, I couldn't, and all of a sudden I had realised that I could do something, and it made an enormous difference. So I came back to Mount Bulla. I then spent just the rest of the year at school. We didn't have any summer training. There was nothing like that. So I had to wait until the following year. We came back onto snow, and I really wanted to become the national champion. So I trained pretty hard that winter. And at the end of that winter, I did. I beat Tasha, and I finished up in first place. And from there, straight away, I knew that I didn't want to just do that. I wanted to get overseas and compete. And so I came back to Melbourne, and I remember telling my father, I said, I really want to be a full-time skier. And my dad said, no, you don't. You want to finish year 12 and go to university. I said, no, I want to go overseas and ski. And he said that he wasn't willing to support me in that endeavour. They didn't have the money to do it anyway. He said, if you're so good, then you'll be able to do it on your own, and you don't need us. And we had a very big fight that night, and he threw me out of the house. And I don't mean he said, get out, I'll speak to you in a few hours. He threw me out of the house physically. He picked up the things from my room and threw them outside the front door. And the very last thing he did in his fury with me was he went around the house and he took down all of the photos of me that he could find. And I can remember, and funny, I get teary thinking about it. I can remember him waving the photos at me, and he said, you're not my daughter. You don't belong in this house. And I was deeply hurt. And my mother, my poor mum, she knew better than to intervene. At that stage, I think people were different and life was a bit different. So I went and stayed with a friend, ended up staying with a friend for a couple of weeks. And next thing I did was I got myself a job because I needed some money to get overseas. I needed some money for equipment, and I didn't have anything. And I got a job from somebody who was a really keen supporter of the ski team, and he had a restaurant in the city of Melbourne, and he only did lunches. And he was in the financial district, and it was a place called Tony's Bar and Grill, and it was quite a fancy restaurant. Anyway, he gave me a job as a waitress, and I can tell you right now, might have been a good skier. I was not a good waitress, but every time I would serve somebody their lunch, I would always say, hi, I'm Kirstie Marshall. I want to be the world's greatest skier. If you can help me, or if you know anyone who can help, just out of kind of making conversation, but also just trying to promote myself. And there was a woman whose name was Philomena, and she was a regular. She used to come in to that restaurant for lunch 5 days a week. And after 2 weeks of me serving her, and saying exactly the same thing. She actually put her hands on the table. She said, "Oh my God, how much will it cost for me to get rid of you?" And she was, again, only half joking, because she was the owner of a very large travel company called Philomena's Travel. And she, in turn, became my first sponsor. So at the age of 17, against my father's wishes, without their support, I then decided to go overseas and represent Australia for the very first time for the World Cup circuit. And the World Cup circuit is a competition that's run once. We change countries once a week and continents once a month. And it goes from the beginning of December until the end of March. So it's 4 months of competition. And it's obviously, first of all, quite expensive. And that's where the travel company came into it. But also the way that sponsorship worked back then, I had to pay for what my expenses were. I got the receipts and then I would submit them back and get reimbursed. But because I was on a 4-month competition tour, I couldn't actually put any of my expenses in until I was going to be coming back in March, or actually April, by the time I got back. So the Ski Federation lent me the money to go over that first year. And the first year I got over there, I remember I had no uniform. I had no teammates, and not just in my discipline. There were 3 different disciplines that were on that tour. There was moguls, aerial skiing, and ballet. There was no other Australians there. I had no coach. And I hitchhiked my way up to the first event. And when I arrived there, it was like I'd landed in Wonderland. Like, it was, there were all of these athletes, and they were wearing beautiful uniforms, and they were team buses. And it was just, there were 350 athletes from all around the world. The American team, the Canadian team, the French team were enormous and just so well organised. And they had a registration. So you had to go up and tell the organising admin people who you were, and then they'd allocate you food vouchers and your accommodation, etc., and give you the schedule and whatever else, bit of merchandise. And I got to the front desk and I said, Kirstie Marshall, Australian ski team. And the lady, she looked down and she said, no, Kirstie Marshall from Austria. And I said, no, not Austria, Australia. And she didn't even bother looking back at her list. She goes, well, I've never had anyone from Australia, you know. And I said, well, I'm here and I'm here to compete. And she said, where's your accreditation? And I didn't know what she was talking about. And I pulled out my passport and she said, no, your skiing accreditation. And it turns out you have to have some international, it's almost like a driver's certificate, but it's a skiing license to say that you are endorsed by your federation, that you've reached the criteria to be qualified to represent your country. And I knew nothing about it. And so I just explained to her that, you know, there was a time difference. And, you know, I was trying to ring back to Australia. I didn't even know who the federation was. And I ended up getting a hold of Jeff, the coach from Team Bulla, from the team that I was in back in Victoria. And he said, I'll sort it out. He said, I won't be able to sort it out overnight. And I went back to this lady and I said, look, we're trying to sort it out, but I don't have any money to, you know, I can't pay normal rates. So what am I meant to do? What do I do? And I was pretty upset. And she said, look, how about you come and I'll give you a bed at my place until you sort this out. And so for the first 3 nights of my first World Cup, I slept on the floor of one of the volunteers who was working there. Thank goodness. It was in Le Plan in France. And she saved me, because if it hadn't been for her, I probably would have turned around and gone home, not really knowing what to do. So I made it through. That first week was the hardest. My first World Cup competition, I was unbelievably nervous. I finished last. We changed from Le Plan. We went to La Clusaz, another place in France, and then I finished last. We had one more competition we had one competition in Austria, and then we had one competition in Italy. And on the Austrian one, I finished last. On the 4th one, I finished about 4th, and that was just before the Christmas break. But because I was so far from Australia, I couldn't go back to Australia for a period of a week. So I had one of the people on the World Cup circuit let me come and stay with their family, a German skier whose name was Birgit Stein. And I had my first European winter, which was divine. And I got through that season. You know, it was hard slog. It was not a whole lot of fun. And I wound up being ranked 10th in the world. But that was, at that stage, the highest ranking by an Australian, and it actually changed a lot of things when I came back. First thing that happened was I submitted all of my expenses. I'd spent $25,000 through those 4-month period, and they went to Philomena's to the company so I could get reimbursed. About a month after I got back, I got a letter. It was a legal letter to tell me that the company had gone bankrupt and I wasn't going to get any of my money back. So I was ranked 10th in the world. It was a fantastic thing for winter sports in Australia, but unfortunately for me, I was broke, and the only way I could figure out to pay back that money, to get more money, was to get better. And I trained unbelievably hard, and I committed myself to just getting as good as I could, as quickly as I could. I paid for a coach. I invested in a coach, and that next winter I got back overseas for the next World Cup circuit, another 4 months, and at the end of that, as Lily might have briefly said very quickly, that I finished 3rd in the world. And the following year, same thing, worked hard, trained hard, finished 2nd in the world. And my 4th year on the World Cup circuit was when I won the overall World Cup title. So I came back in 1992. I just turned 21, and I was ranked number 1 in the world. The first time we'd had a person, male or female, from Australia, from Australasia actually, in a winter sport, any winter sport, ranked number 1. So there was quite a lot of publicity back then. I had been fortunate that in the audience, in watching one of my World Cup wins in Breckenridge, USA, was a guy called Daryl Summers, who had a television program on TV which is called Hey Hey It's Saturday. And I was invited on the show, and from there sprang a whole lot of opportunities and different media sources. So my profile was raised relatively quickly. And unlike now, especially in winter sports, there's actually quite a lot of winter athletes. And back then, I was really the only one. I'd competed in the Olympics in Albertville in that same winter. There was a break of the World Cup circuit for about 2.5 weeks. And I competed there, and it was only a demonstration sport. And I finished in 7th place, but I did come back as ranked number 1 in the world. And it was really interesting because I got a lot of credit from other sports, and I was given a lot of recognition through the mainstream media. And I really struggled to get the backing from some of the more traditional elements of winter sports, which was the alpine skiing. And there was an article that was put in a newspaper, and there was a quote there by somebody associated with alpine skiing, and they said that Kirstie's not a real skier. It's just like having a clown with skis on, and I was so hurt by that. And so I decided that I was going to prove to everybody that I was a real skier, and I competed that year in Australia. In mogul skiing in addition to aerial. So I wanted to be the first person to represent Australia in 2 disciplines at the Olympics, which was going to be mogul skiing and aerial skiing. So I qualified for aerials. I was ranked number 1 in Australia in 1992, and I had won 3 of the first mogul events in the country, and there was 1 more, and the last one was actually up at Mount Bulla, and it was the A-Bomb Mogul Challenge. And the way we had the finals was they would have a course split in 2. You had red side, blue side. You'd compete against the other person at the same time. And there was marks for your technique, and there was also timing element of it. Anyway, the gates went open, and I pushed out. I knew the other skier was Maz Despaz. She was very good technically, but I knew I was really fast. And as I pushed out, I was slightly ahead of her, and I couldn't see her. And I got towards the end of the course, the last jump, and I actually went off sideways, blew my knee out upon hitting the ground. My skis had ricocheted up towards me, and they fell off, and I slithered across the finish line. And what I didn't realise was, because Maz was behind me or out of my vision, she'd actually gone around one of the posts and was disqualified. She'd gone out of the course. So I didn't need to be pushing as hard as I did all that way. And in the end, I ended up winning the competition. But I had to go down to Melbourne the following day and had my knee reconstructed. So there is a fabulous photo of me sitting on the podium with my leg in a splint, and I'm quite happy holding the trophy. And Maz is standing next to me. And, you know, she's obviously, you can only just see her knees really if you're looking at my head. But it changed a lot of things, even that, because it took me out of my sport, aerial skiing, for nearly 18 months. And it was a very slow rehab. But by the time I came back, it was a very different attitude. I think that at the age of 22, I thought I was missing out on a whole lot of life. A lot of my friends were in relationships, getting married, having kids, buying houses, and I felt like I was missing out on all of that. And what I realized during those 18 months was, firstly, just how much I loved the sport, how much I wanted to get back at doing it, and how hard I was willing to work for that to happen. And incredibly for me, when I came back into the sport, I qualified for the 1994 Olympics with 2 weeks to go. I only just made it. They named me as the flag bearer for Australia, and that was in Lillehammer. But unfortunately, I got a little bit injured pushing myself that hard to get back, probably a bit early. And straight after the Olympic Games, I ended up coming back to Australia and having some more operations on my knee. So much of my career was blighted, I think, by knee injuries. I've had 15 knee operations. Actually, no, I've had 16. 2 months ago, I had my entire right knee replaced. And I spent 6 weeks in hospital, and I've just been walking for the last 3 weeks. It feels really good, but it's a legacy of all of the things that I did. And I always think that it didn't really happen because I was jumping or aerial skiing or mogul skiing. It happened because we didn't have a whole lot of support around us at that time. And if you think about when you're in a community, a Scouts community or a school community, and even now, thankfully, much more in sports in those communities, it's not just an athlete and a coach or a team manager or a sponsor. It's the physiotherapists and the sports psychologists and the nutritionists, and they're the ones that really make an enormous difference. And I'm glad that those things exist now. I don't regret that they weren't there for me. I had an incredible time, I wouldn't change anything in the world. But the lesson I learned out of skiing was, like when I was at school and the teacher said, "Yes, Kirstie, you can do it, you can do it," and I didn't believe them. So I couldn't. But once I started skiing, and there were people in the very early days, including my own father, saying, "You'll never make it. You'll never succeed. You're Australian, you're female, it's winter sports." It didn't matter that they said that, because I didn't believe it. I believed I would. And the lesson I've learned, and it's kept me in good stead all through my life, is the only person that can decide whether or not you can or can't do something is you. It's yourself. Because if you believe it's possible, then it is. But if you believe it's not possible, then it's impossible. So I hope that when you analyse, when you think about something that somebody says that you don't agree with, remember that it's not your voice, and it doesn't count, because it's only your voice that does. So I'd like to hopefully open up the floor for some questions, and I hope you've enjoyed what I've talked about, and I really think that there's something that you'd like to know a little bit more about. So hi, Lily.
Hi. Oh my goodness. I'm still like reeling from that. That was actually incredible. I'm like 21 now, so I'm just like shocked by how much you'd achieved, and like how you just absolutely overcome like everything that was taken your way. Like going all the way overseas and like not having the pass that you needed, like I would have freaked out.
I know. Well, I mean, and that's the funny thing, was I was 17 the first time I got overseas, and that's the age of my oldest daughter. And the first time I really skied, I was 15, which is the age of my younger daughter. So I look at them and I think their worlds are such in their control that whatever anybody thinks or even what they think can turn on a dime. Everything can just change so wonderfully. And you've got to be open for that. I think for me, getting overseas and making that work was because I didn't want it to fail. I didn't want to come back and, have to face my father and have him say, I told you. I want to be able to prove, most of all, that I could do it. And I love that.
Oh my goodness. Well, that's really incredible to hear. But we've got some starting questions to get the ball rolling. So,
Certainly.
what was the fondest moment of your career?
Gee, that's hard, actually. Look, I remember that first week when I came onto the World Cup circuit, and I had, as I said, no teammates, no uniform, no coach. I didn't know anybody. I should have studied French in school. Study French if you're going traveling. And I got up onto the hill, and there were these coaches from all around the world. And I remember going up to one of them. He was a Swiss coach, and Mitch. That's what I was just trying to think of his name, Mitch. And I said to him, "Look, I don't have a coach, and I wonder if you could just keep an eye out for me." And he said, yeah, sure. He was coaching, 5 or 6 other athletes, only Swiss athletes, Switzerland. And every time I jumped, I'd just wait until he was ready, and I'd say, can I jump now? Yeah. And then I'd come back up and I'd talk to him and he'd tell me what I'd done wrong. And then the next day I'd come out to training, and maybe, he wasn't there and there was another guy there, it might be Alain from, Germany. And I'd go up and I'd say, hi, I'm Kirstie, I'm from Australia. I don't have a coach. Would it be all right if you keep an eye on me? And when I think about one of my fondest memories was by the time I got to the end of that year, I had 20 coaches, and I had 20 coaches who were friends. And I've remained friends with all of those guys. And they were all just a little bit older than me, because back then you kind of finished your skiing career, you'd go straight into coaching because it wasn't an established sport. So these guys weren't that much older than me. But most of all, the camaraderie was enormous. Now, if I had have come over to the World Cup circuit with a coach, I never would have met those guys. So I think that in my own way, I always say to my kids, you've got to find your clan. And sometimes it takes quite a while. You might not find it at school. You might find it well and truly out of school, maybe at university, maybe at a job. Maybe it's out of scouts. You find your people. And for me, when I first got overseas, I found my people. I found people that to this day I'm just so close to. And it was just lovely. Yeah, that's my fondest memory.
Oh, that is quite cute to hear. The next question kind of leads on from that, and it says so when you did go skiing, were the international people, did they stick together, or did you kind of make friends with everyone?
Yeah, well, like I said, I was really lucky. If you go onto the World Cup circuit now, no such thing. Everybody, they're all in their corners. They don't talk, they don't train, they don't share information. We had such a greater need to rely on each other. I didn't have any way of training in the summer in Australia back then. So I would go overseas, and I lived for a couple of summers in a place called Evian, France, with the French team. I trained with them. I trained in Japan at a place called Inawashiro. That's where the Japanese had a training facility. I trained in Lake Placid, New York City, with, again, the Americans. I trained in a place called Lac-Beauport in Quebec in Canada. I trained in Park City, Utah. So what I'm saying is, back then, we just, and I'd be staying at another athlete's house, and especially if any skiers came to Australia, they would always stay with, my parents at my parents' place. And so we really looked after each other, and there was a lot of great camaraderie. Now, much less. I think that the pressure to be on your own within your own nation and that support network around it is much tighter. I think people's skiing careers are actually a lot shorter. So there's a few factors that play into that. Yeah, definitely I got the best out of my sport in terms of meeting people, traveling and having a great time.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely sounds like times have changed then.
Yeah, and they have to. Do you know they have to? if you think about anything, progression is a great thing. It can be hard to handle change, but it is always necessary, because you look backwards and you know that the lessons or the things that you've gone through, the adversities that you go through, are only meaningful if somebody else can benefit from them. So, it's passing on that information and growing from that.
Awesome. Well, we're going to go to some Facebook questions now. So firstly, from Melinda, has your father changed his view of skiing?
Yes, my father changed his view of skiing. It was about 3 years later. We didn't talk for nearly 3 years. It was a very sad time. And my dad and I, he's still alive. He's, excuse me, he's 84. And he talks about it too as a very sad time that we were logging heads. He actually apologised to me. I was named Australian Skier of the Year for the first time after I had won the overall World Cup in 1992. And when I came back from the presentation from that, he apologised. And he said, look, I really want you to understand that I didn't not love you. He said, I did it because I loved you. I was so scared that it would be a decision that would ruin your life. What parent who cares for their child would let that happen? And he thought that by throwing down the gauntlet to me, I would change my mind and stay in the safety of under their roof and with the provision of, food on the table, and go to university, get a degree, and, get a job and all those things that sort of are the normal markers. But for me, I didn't ever think I was going to be successful at university. Whereas once I started skiing, it didn't really matter if I was successful. I just knew I wanted to give it a shot. And my dad utterly respected the fact that I went against him and proved him wrong. And we've had an amazingly close relationship ever since. So, yeah, he changed his mind very, very much.
Oh, I'm very glad. I was thinking the same thing. I'm very glad to hear that you guys kind of got back together. So we've got a question from Gilbert. Is there an international dish you miss?
Do you know, I lived in Japan. When I first started skiing, I did actually go over for quite a few months and lived in Japan. I love Japanese food. A dish that I miss is the Japanese in the morning, they have rice and they have like a sticky beans. And it's quite bitter. And it's sort of like, it's the Vegemite of Japan. And I love it. And you put it on your rice, put the sticky beans on the rice, you put a dash of soy sauce, and then you get some nori, some seaweed, and with your chopsticks, and you'd put the little strip of seaweed, and then you'd wrap it all up. It became like a little sushi, and I'd eat that for breakfast. And my mouth waters as I think about that. I just love it. I don't know why. I love Vegemite as well, don't get me wrong, but I love the sticky beans in Japan.
Oh my goodness. From Russell, is gymnastics still the best starting point? Jackie Cooper told me a similar story about starting in gymnastics and transferring to skis. What does it take to get started with Team Bulla?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Gymnastics is the basis of nearly every sport. The skills that you develop through gymnastics, your strength, your agility, your flexibility, your hand-to-eye coordination, everything about that sport is useful in any other sport. I don't care if it's throwing darts, archery, pole jumping, and there have been quite a few gymnasts that have gone on to success in other sports. And I'm thinking straight away of Sue Stanley, Emma George. There's Jackie Cooper, Lisa Camplin was an ex-gymnast. Most of our aerial skiers have actually been. Lydia Lasilla, ex-gymnast. But it's just a fantastic sport. So how would you get involved in Team Bulla? Well, basically, if you haven't skied before, the first thing you'd probably want to do is learn how to ski. And going up just as a recreational skier, you'd be able to join one of the junior teams no matter how much you've skied, or one of the development teams. So it's just about getting up there and making yourself known and touching base with Team Bulla. And fantastically now everything's online, and there's a lot of programs that they're doing to prep athletes online before they even get out and do it in the real world.
Awesome. I'm sorry if I butcher this, Venetia, when you kept finishing last in your first season, did you question your ability and feel like giving in?
Yes, that's a great question. I don't think I ever felt like giving in because I was really committed to being there for the 4 months. But it's quite soul destroying to finish last. And the thing I couldn't figure out was what to do differently. So each of those 3 weeks, I did different things, but I kept finishing last. And it wasn't until I think the first 3 weeks I was trying to not win, because I wasn't really capable of winning at that early stage, but that's sort of where my head was at. And it wasn't until I started to go backwards a little bit and set my goals much more realistically, both in training and then in the competition, that I was better prepared for the competition. I was more calm. I was more, I think I slept better the night before. I was more conscious of just the need to put myself in a good place mentally. And the best competitions that I've ever had were when I was the least stressed, without a doubt. And some of them were big competitions. I won the World Championships in 1997, and I beat the person that finished second was more than 20 points behind me. And normally competitions are won within 1 or 2 points. So I absolutely smashed it. But I was in a really great frame of mind. So the change over those 3 weeks was to start competing for myself and not against other people. I was really just competing against myself.
Yeah, I feel like that's a pretty good mantra for like everything.
Yes.
From Jenna, do you still enjoy skiing? And thank you for your amazing contribution to Australian skiing. We've seen you at Mount Bulla years ago. You're inspirational.
Oh, Jenna, thank you very much for making me blush. Do I still ski? Well, I've actually got 4 stepkids and 2 of my own. The 4 stepkids are in their 20s, and the other 2, obviously, I've said they're 15 and 17. Both my girls are very tall. I'm 5'5". Both my girls are nearly 6 foot. Even the 15-year-old, size 11 feet. They're not very good at skiing, partially because they're very good at football, basketball, netball, rowing. So they've done a whole lot of other sports. And I think that's really important because there are a lot of people that just do one sport at that age, at sort of around that age of sort of 13 to 17. And you lose a lot of other parts of, I call it your community. You know, the girls' football community, they play for Richmond Junior Football Club, is just a great community. I just love it. The rowing community is fabulous. Tennis, they don't do tennis. They don't do netball anymore. So for me to go skiing, I would have to do it for me because it wasn't really a family thing. There were too many other things. My weekends are for my kids. I had my time, and now I just really love supporting them in whatever it is that they do. And it's not always sport, but it's their time.
That's very, very nice. A question from Will. Where was your favourite tournament?
Well, I think that's a great question, Will, because we were talking about that frame of mind. I think I was my greatest number of successes, and I have to go back. I don't really even know the stats anymore. But Breckenridge, I was very good, and also in Whistler, in Blackcomb. And both those places, particularly Whistler, Blackcomb, have a lot of Australians there. And I remember when I won my first World Cup in Blackcomb, I would have thought 50% of the crowd that came to the award presentation in the village were Australian. So there, it was like a hometown advantage. And I'd say that, probably Blackcomb, Whistler Blackcomb was where I did my best because there were just so many great Aussie supporters.
Home away from home. From Rowan, if you had the chance, what would you tell your younger self that would have helped you many years ago?
Well, when I think about that, actually, Rowan, I think back to that person that I was at school. And, I kept seeing everybody else as brilliant, and I thought of myself as everything but brilliant. And now I realise that every single individual has their own brilliance. It's not something that you compare. So I'd go back and again tell my younger self that stop comparing yourself to everybody else, and like who you are a lot more than you did at that stage. I remember looking in the mirror, and I would have only been 13, 14, and I've got a really square jaw. If you look back at old photos of me, same jaw, same face, no work. But I didn't like it back then. And I found it really hard to look at my reflection for a long time when I was younger. And I think that when I started to view myself as more successful through skiing, I started to like how I looked, or at least I probably thought it was so not important because I could do these other things. So I tell my younger self to just relax and like who you are, because you're pretty okay.
From Lee, what do you enjoy doing now?
Well, given the fact that I've got an artificial knee now, which is so strange, but it has actually been giving me quite a lot of trouble over the last sort of 5-6 years. I've taken a lot more time doing sports that don't put a lot of pressure on my knee. There are things like whitewater rafting, did a bit of kiteboarding, love cycling. I actually really enjoy playing golf. So I'm still pretty active. I love fishing, absolutely love fishing. I've had to do more of it on a boat as opposed to I was doing a lot of river fishing and beach fishing, surf fishing. So yeah, they're the things I love to do. I've been told that in about 12 months, when my knee is fully recovered, I'll actually be able to ski again. I don't know if I need to, but my plan is to just continue to be as active as I can. I love hiking and, it's not necessarily things that are dangerous. I do like abseiling and those sorts of things. But I think mostly it's being just able to go for a run, with the kids. They can run and I can't. Just spending time with friends and doing some of those great activities.
Well, it sounds like you should have joined Scouts.
No, I would have loved to, because that wasn't an option really for me when I was younger. I went one because of gymnastics. But everything I know about Scouts, and I've seen some amazing. When I was a member of Parliament, I was invited to some of the presentations and the shows that were done out at Whitehawks, and they were unbelievable. They were just so fantastic, and everybody had a role to play in the success of them. So yes, I would have loved to have been a Scout.
Oh my goodness. So this is going to be the last question of the night from Akitha. How many Olympic Games have you been in?
Akitha, I have been in 3. I was in the 1992 in Albertville, France, the 1994 in Lillehammer, Norway, and the last one was in the 1998 in Nagano in Japan. And the reason you've got the 92, 94, and then 98 is back in 1992 and the years before that, they were always, the summer and winter were held together. And they decided, probably because of economy more than anything, to separate the summer from the winter. And they wanted the year 2000 particularly to be a summer one. So on the count back, it meant we had 2 winters in a row. So I was lucky enough to do the 92, then the 94 where I carried the flag, and then the 98. And then, of course, 2000 was in Sydney. And I was invited to go and watch that, and of course watch the great Kathy Freeman, a friend of mine, do an amazing job there. So 3 Olympic Games. I think I've done 7 World Championships, and the rest is all history. I had a great time.
Wow. I'm still shocked by how much you've done. When you brought up the Parliament, I was like, oh my God, I completely forgot that you had this whole thing.
We can do that another time.
It's absolutely incredible. Well, we just want to say a big thank you so much for coming on here tonight, and for answering all of the questions that we had.
Thank you very much. And to my beautiful work colleague, Lisa Picking, who I adore, who was the person that had invited me. I thank her very much for the great job that she does at Scouts, and thank everybody who's doing a wonderful job supporting our youth. Can't rave enough about you. Brilliant.
Always an option to be a leader.
Yes. Well, I think I've got a bit of time to listen.
Awesome. Well, for everyone that's been watching, we hope to see you all tomorrow at 7 p.m. where you'll get to chat with a Paralympian, Jack Swift. Then on Saturday at 1 p.m, we're going to have another yoga session and relax with Lily. And then Sunday at 1 p.m, we're having a native animal encounter with wildlife exposure. So thank you all for joining us, and maybe next time you can invite another friend. But yes, thanks for coming and watching tonight.